start recording here. Think of even in our little sample web page, let's say I wanted to change the font or the font size. And you may have seen me a couple times use a style tag where I set the one cell to blue. On a large website, imagine how cumbersome it would be that every time you wanted to change a style, if you had to go to every tag and change it. It would take forever. So cascading style sheets are used, as I've written here, to broadly define how elements are drawn. You don't have to format every tag anymore. You can if you want. We'll talk about that. But you can define a general style that can be applied throughout your page or throughout your website. And that's stored inline or external if you want it on a whole website. So two main ways to store styles are inline, and that's what I did in the examples before the break. I'd put style equals aquamarine and that. That's good. That's the preferred method. That's how you would do it if you wanted to change one or two tags to a different style. But that would be cumbersome on a site like CNN site that has thousands of tags. An external style sheet, you set up a separate text file with a .css extension that you then reference in your HTML page. And then you name styles in that CSS file, and then you can use that style over and over. And the tag just references the style name. So for example, I don't know this for sure, but they must have a style. If you go to the CNN website, they have a link, which we'll talk about in just a second, a new type of tag to this outside website with a CSS tag. And if I click that, oh, that's hard to read because there's no line, there's no carriage returns. But each one of these horrible looking things is a named style. And you'll notice that's not even worth, it's more complicated. I'm just going to close that. Maybe the geography website. I like to show real examples whenever I can. It's not always. So if you look at the UB Geography website, it has a style to it, hence the name. There's a color scheme, there's specific fonts set up, font sizes. That's all defined in a style sheet. This style is used throughout the geography website. So if you click faculty, oops. What if they're doing some updates?
So you're saying, for instance, the font on the page may be the same throughout the entire page?
Yes. If you think about, maybe we'll go back to CNN uses a consistent font. It wouldn't look good if you go to the politics page and it's all different colors. Notice it's, now that I've said that, they have a different banner I've never seen them have before. But notice there is a style, similar header colors and similar files in the headings and the text and so on. And in geography, that's a little better. So there's a cascading style sheet that the geography website links to. And if I open it, it's still not that easy to read, but it's better. So they have a style called a graphic submit button. So whenever there's a button with a link and you hover over it, the color is white, for example. So if there's submit buttons on every page, and Sharmista says, I want it to be yellow when you hover over it. Rather than having to change that to yellow on every page, you change the style in one spot. So then any button that references that style will automatically change. And the examples we will look at will be much simpler than this. Hopefully a good introduction to what a style sheet is. So as I mentioned, the simplest thing to do is an inline style within one tag. So here, the attribute is style. And then in this example, I've set 3 different things in one style attribute. Color, font, and font size. And on the body, notice I've set background color. So I go to the body of my page, style equals background, and you see there's quite a few. And I hit colon and autocomplete comes up. I can pick a lot of different colors.
But it doesn't actually show you the sample.
Not on this. You'd have to find a website. Yeah. Gosh, I thought that'd be easier to find. A list of web colors.
What was the name of that site?
This one, I'm not finding what I want yet.
Oh, okay.
Oh, HTML color names. Oh, there we go. www.w3schools.com/HTML_color names.asp. And this gives you an example of what every color looks like. You can also set your own color using these hexadecimal color schemes that you see here. See this 6-character hexadecimal number here? That's an RGB value. So the first 2 characters indicate how much red is in the color, and it can go from 0, 0 is no red, to FF is all saturated completely with red. F is 16 in hexadecimal. The next 2 characters would be how much green is represented, from 0, 0 meaning no green, to FF being saturated with green. And then the final 2 numbers are how much blue is represented, from 0, 0 to FF. So notice here, black is all zeros. There's no color. Conveniently, you'll see blue is a pure blue. The last 2 characters indicating blue are FF, but there's nothing from the other colors. So to add those, just use a £sign instead of putting a named color and then your color combination. Like if I go down to red, notice it's FF 0000. Purple.
It's just saturated red.
Yeah, perfect. That's a pure red. FF is the brightest or most saturated, is pure red. Purple is a mix of red and blue. So what they have for purple is 80 and 80, which is kind of in the middle between 0 and FF. And then no green. There's no green in purple. A saturated red and a saturated blue, not to get into art too much, it would be magenta. So magenta is FF00. Where to go? F. And don't pay any attention to those colors on this projector are way off. Like look at lime looks yellow. That doesn't look magenta at all. That looks purple. But trust me, if you bring it up on your screen, the colors look more appropriate. So you can also pick your own colors. And this website that we found, I think, would be useful. So notice my website now has a background color. I could also set a style at the body level. Oh, that didn't work. Oh. Very strange. It doesn't want to take the style. That's interesting. I didn't close the style on the background of the body, and that was preventing this from doing this. Now notice the style changed to this batang. The color, yeah. I never closed the closed quote up there. So now everything in the table has that's a TD has a size of 24.
The text says font family.
Yes, text is font. The font family is the font.
Okay.
And notice I can go to each individual cell if I want and change the style. So for flag image, I have the font Calibri. Well, that's nice. Imagine how cumbersome that would be to do that to every tag. So that's where the style sheets will come in handy. So the local style, the inline style will override the external style. So often, you know, you would set a default external style, which we'll do in a minute, and then if you wanted to override one particular one, you would put it in there. I didn't see it today, but when we did this lecture last summer, I went to the CNN page, and there happened to be an important story. I don't recall what it was. So they had overridden, they have a typical style for their story header, and they had overridden it with a bolder text for the one particular news item that was more important. I don't remember what it was. So that was an example where they overrode their default style for one tag. So how do we create, let's say you do want to create a cascading style sheet. This is how you do it in, I mean it could be it's just a text file. But the easiest way to do it in Visual Studio would be to click File, New, and then File. And yes, last week we chose HTML page, now we'll choose Style Sheet. And then name it .css. So File, New. This is Visual Studio 2012, but same difference. File, New, File, Style Sheet. And it comes in with, I'll save it, Style Sheet 1. The default text it starts with is just body. And so these will look a little bit like what we'll do in JavaScript. We set up names of styles in the style sheet, and then everything within the brackets, which is nothing right now, defines what will be, what the class, or what it defines what styles the class body will have. And it also, when you have a CSS outline, you can see on the left here, see the items. So there's 3 classes on this style sheet file. First one just says body, and that's a generic way of saying any body tag will have that background color. I could do TD or anything like that. I'll do that in a second. If I wanted to define a specific name, I can do so with a dot in front of it. So this is a class called Red Bills Text, and it's set to a red color, Cambria, and a bold font. I have a class called Purple Giants Text, set it to a different font, different color. So what do we do with that? Couple things we have to do is in the header part of the HTML page, once we have this CSS file, we need to link to it. With a link tag, in href, just like in a tag. Type equals text/CSS, that tells HTML this is a style sheet. And then rel equals style sheet. I'm not sure why we need both. We do. So then, if we want to name a specific class, we have a class attribute in the tag. So some of the points that I've just mentioned, the external file must be referenced with a link tag. If a generic style is included, it doesn't need to be explicitly stated. Remember we had the body text a moment ago. I don't have to say body class equals body. But these specific ones with a dot in front of them, I do have to define in the item. Specific style classes are referenced with the attribute class. So, and as you saw from when I was trying to get that to work, using styles can be picky. Notice one mistake I made in a different style affected the rest of them, so it can be a challenge. It can be frustrating. So I'm adding a link text, href, and see the autocomplete in Visual Studio? It sees what text files are in my same folder, so I can just pick Style Sheet 1 CSS. On a full enterprise website, you're probably not that lucky. I said text equals, type equals text CSS, rel equals style sheet. So now that when this page loads, it loads the style sheets from that link with it. And if we look, notice that sure enough the color changed to blue because it was loaded from the style sheet, and I set the background text, the text on body, to Franklin Gothic book. So most of the text on the page changed to Franklin Gothic book, but notice, remember what I said about override, the ones where I specifically set a style remained the same font. So for those TD cells, I overrode the style sheet font with the specific font using the inline style. So you have the options of working both together like that. Make sense? So you can see here very easily, the webmaster, department head Sharmista comes and says, "Oh, I hate that color." Now I could change it to, this is going to be fuchsia. And that's, I guess that looks horrible, doesn't it? I'll change it back. But now, because I've made that change, any website that uses this style sheet, they all change with one change of text. So you can probably already see the big advantage.
Can you show how you're linking it to your web page? So you're taking the actual style sheet reference and putting it actually right into the
web page under, and I'll show you where, in the header area.
Okay.
That's a requirement, otherwise it won't know what that other file is. But this is a very simple case because it's just a plain old body tag. I don't need to do anything else.
Okay. So can you go back to the style sheet? And then where are you copying the link from?
So I know that it's right in the same folder, so I just can put style sheet 1 CSS. So this is the body tag, and that's how it knows to make the body blue and the font here. As another example, which might help you, any TD or any table column will be yellow now. This one isn't. I never actually specified a third column. I think that's why that looks like that. So notice again the TD with the inline style overrode the style sheet. So now because I have a global TD setting in the style sheet, any TD is yellow except for the one that was overridden. Any select, I could say, font weight, like that. So I changed the font on the select image.
So anything that you would select, like you're selecting a nation, you'll turn blue.
Yeah. And I don't recall. Notice it turns blue when you select. I can't recall the style for changing that. There's too many.
I'm just trying to follow you here.
Yeah. So the style sheet defines globally the font for any select tag on the page, any TD, or any body, which there'd be just one. You can only have one body tag in the page. So does that help?
Yeah, I got you.
So, and then maybe you can also see right away how powerful it is. Not just for example like this, it's not so bad, but imagine you're a webmaster for a site like CNN that has hundreds of pages on it.
Yeah.
Let's say Ted Turner comes out and says, I want a different color red now. It wouldn't be that hard to update them all. Then the other example I want to show is naming your own style. Now you do have to set that class attribute.
So this is for any Buffalo Bills text on the page?
Yeah, where I define it, which I'll show you. They're not really red. I'm dating myself. They don't have the red helmets anymore, do they? They changed it like 5 years ago. So now I define my own Buffalo Bills class. I would define where that's used with the class tag. And it's actually, I think that might be new in Visual 2012. It actually read the style sheet, found the names of the classes that would correspond to the tag, and lets me pick it. So now just that TD has the Buffalo Bills style, right?
Yeah,
Oh, you can't read it. That is, you can't read it with the colors, but it's red with blue letters.
So if you had multiple pages, all you would have to do is reference that in
Yes.
the style sheet, and that would take care of each page that word of the Buffalo Bill.
Yes. So the use cases, and that's an excellent question. If you wanted to globally change everything, like a background, just a default tag like body here. If there's just one thing you want to change, do it inline. Like there's just one button somewhere, like the example of the headlines, and one headline's more important, you want to make it bigger, just change it inline there. But and the third use case that I have is you want to use this Buffalo Bills font in select areas throughout the site to find your own class. Does that help kind of distinguish? And most often, this is a very simple example to help you through the lecture and exercises and that, so you don't get overboard. But as you saw in the CNN example, on an enterprise website, that can get very, very complicated, as we saw.
You can go back to the HTML page. And
Certainly.
See what you put in.
Yeah, so to have that class use the Buffalo Bills style sheet.
Okay.
Class equals Buffalo Bills. So both that, and note again, just to review, that both the inline style and that style override the default styles. So it's something you don't really do it justice in a course like this. We're not going to use style sheets that much when we get into ArcGIS JavaScript or that. But I want you to be familiar with it, because if you say you end up going into a career where you're doing more web development and not like spending all your day in GIS development, you'll use style sheets all the time. So though we won't talk much about them in the course, I wanted you to have exposure to them. Oh, we're already there. Some of these slides will be a review of what we talked about when we started. We talked about to show you some other ways to interact with the user. Okay, so this is a review of the different type attributes, and I gave you 9 of the most used ones. There's quite a few more here. I also introduced, there's a tag just called button. Add a button to your page. It's similar to a Windows form, but it doesn't have to be in a Windows form. You can click a button to call a JavaScript function. As I mentioned, we'll spend a significant portion of the course, you could even argue the rest of the course almost, starting next week, or talking about JavaScript. So that's an introduction to that. So if we did a very quick introduction, we'll get out early, I think. An introduction into interacting with the user using HTML. And this would lend itself into Lab 1. Then we'll talk a little bit about object-oriented code, and we'll be done. So at the bottom of this very long page, I'm going to create a new table. I'm going to create a column here. I'm going to ask for a name. Within that, I'm going to use an input text box with the ID txt name and an inline style like this. So the first item in the table is just going to be an input text box like we did before the break. Then I'm going to have a student. So, what? Oh, sorry. Then I'm blanking on the final thing here, but it's a button. I really should. Yeah, I did forget. I did put check student. It's getting late. So I gave an ID. So now that we're getting in, I didn't put the IDs in the examples till now. Now that we're getting into using these HTML elements in code, it becomes important to add the ID because we're gonna want to reference these in code just like you would in C# programming.
You said the significance of the ID.
Yeah. So now, in a second, I'm going to write code that looks at what the person typed. The way that I reference that is with the ID. So the ID provides a unique name to every one of these tags, which hasn't been that critical up until now, and now it's critical. And here's something new. And again, this is introductory. We'll go over these things in detail. It's kind of a sneak preview of what's to come. So now on the button's going to say click me. We have the ID and there's an event on the button. On click, as you might guess, when the event is clicking the button, when the user clicks the button on the web page, that event will run, and the event will be a JavaScript function called click function, and we're passing it an event. A JavaScript function can accept arguments, and the arguments are in parentheses. The argument here is the value that was entered in text name. And we'll talk more about arguments and functions more later. So now this also should illustrate why that ID becomes important, because I need the ID to pass it to the JavaScript function. So far, there's the text box, the check, and the click me button, which doesn't do anything yet. So if I were quickly to write a it's not passing the name. I won't worry about that right now. So here, it calls this function click function. We'll get into, actually Wednesday, I think. There's another tag that we'll learn about on Wednesday called script, and this is where you write a JavaScript on the page, an inline JavaScript function. So I can say function, and there's the name of my function, the argument. A function has brackets that defines it, just like the style sheets. An alert makes a pop-up. So now when you click the button, it's calling this JavaScript function because I told it. And those with C# experience will be happy because there's a lot of similarities with C#. And there's the alert box. Any questions? Okay, I've got a few. I apologize. Those that took 555, well, these will be some repeat slides that I also had in that class. That kind of couch. JavaScript is an object-oriented programming language, so I have a couple slides to talk about what an object-oriented language is. And some of you have seen this already. An object-oriented program, and then we'll be done. An object-oriented programming language is a software design method that models the characteristics of abstract to real objects using classes and objects. And in that course, we go into a lot of detail about classes and objects in an object-oriented language. We won't go into that level of detail here. We will talk about this. The object model is not as strong in JavaScript as it is in C#. Like one thing you can do, JavaScript is not strongly typed. I'll get into this. Basically, that means you can set properties in an object on the fly. We'll talk more about that. Where in C#, an object is part of a class that's predefined with properties and methods. So it's not as strong as it is in C#, but yet the base is the same. So in JavaScript, functionality is accessed through properties and methods on an object. Everything is an object. So here, this object is a goose. And what I'm getting at this is an object can fall into a variety of classes, even a hierarchy of classes. This goose is a goose, a bird, and a mammal all at the same time. How can that be? Because goose is a type of bird and bird is a type of mammal. A class in code is a blueprint or template for creating specific objects that are utilized in code. And again, this is more strongly adhered to in C# than in JavaScript, but it's still relevant. The class is an abstract representation of a type of object, but an object is a reference to a specific individual. Like a class, I could refer to all of you as a class student, but Dan is a specific object of the type student. Hopefully that helps distinguish class versus object. You can have what's called polymorphism too. You fall into the class student. You also fall into the class UB student, the class human being. Some of you will fall into class citizen of a particular country. So here, I tried to use just a sketch of a crow. You have a class crow that represents, that's a type of bird. But this crow that I photographed, that specific individual that I took a picture of, would be an object that is of a type class. So here, another example of a specific object. The class is woodpecker. And then in the GIS world, a type of object is a map. In the ArcGIS server JavaScript API, you have the most basic, and here's some code that defines the object. I don't necessarily have code to define a woodpecker, but code that defines, the base level object in the ArcGIS server JavaScript API is map. And that's the canvas on which your Esri map is drawn upon. So here's a like animal example and a GIS example. Objects also have properties to describe them. Properties can be specific attributes or another type of object. So you as an object have two arms. So your attribute could be a number or a piece of text. It's your name, your height and weight. Or you could own other objects like your arms and legs and so on. So the mockingbird here has two attributes here defining it in plain text. Its species type, northern mockingbird. It might have a length, the typical mockingbird is 19 inches. I don't know if that's true or not. The mockingbird also has other objects as properties named, like in this example, wings. In GIS, there's an object that you will use called the ArcGIS Server Dynamic Map Service Layer. That'll make more sense later. But it also has two properties, minimum scale and maximum scale. Those are properties on which the layer draws. You can set a layer, if it's too crowded, you can set the layer to turn off. Say it's a layer of every house in the country. It might look fine when you're zoomed in UV, but as you zoom out further, it's just going to be a blur. So you can use this max scale property actually to, when you get out to a certain scale, turn the layer off. So again, animal or bird example, and here's an example of a property that you will use. So again, properties describe objects, and they're defined on the class, but in JavaScript that's not adhered to as strongly as in other programming languages like C#. An object defined on the class or otherwise here also has methods. Methods are actions. So properties describe the object. Methods are things that the object can do. The bird can fly. Bird can sing. Student graduate. Everyone will graduate when they're done. So a method corresponds to an action that you can compel in code. I could make the bird fly. If I run up to it, it'll fly away probably. Or in code, I can get the map to do something. And I think there was supposed to be something on the slide to say, well, imagine if map.zoom in is an action. Zoom in is an action you can have the map perform, have the map zoom in closer. That's a method or action. some methods accept parameters or arguments. We saw that a moment ago with the text name value. That's additional information that the method needs to complete the action. So my bird example here, and methods may only accept certain types of objects. So we have a class falcon, it has a method eat, but that information isn't, just the method eat is not detailed enough. We need to know what it's going to eat, mouse. But the same method may accept different arguments depending on the class of object. The falcon eats a mouse, but the finch here eats bird seed. So because of the different object, even though the method is the same, eat, the argument is different. So the argument comes in parentheses. A GIS example, which I thought, I don't know where that went, but I would, from a moment ago when I used the example zoom in, that requires an argument. If I just tell the map zoom in, it doesn't know how far. Like, what scale do I want to zoom to? Or a better example would be, there's an action or method zoom to scale. It's not very useful unless we tell it what scale. So you have zoom to scale, and then in parentheses you provide the new map scale you want it to zoom to. So the parentheses with the new map scale is what we call the argument on the method. And we talked about events already on the buttons. And my tally here might, having another male tally enter his territory might cause them to yell. So the event is another bird entering the territory, and the result is him yelling. On the map, there's an event called key down. So if someone presses the keyboard down while the mouse is over the map, that's an event that you can trigger something to happen. Just like the on-click was an event we saw 10 minutes ago. When the user clicks on the button, something can happen. And then finally, this is just a JavaScript, not VBA. A variable, this relates mostly to what we talked about so far, the ID. A variable is a container in memory that's used to store information. So if you think back to math class, the Pythagorean theorem and other formulas, the variables were used to store numbers. Here we can store a variety of things in JavaScript, not VBA. It's an old slide. Here's just some examples of storing different types of values in an attribute. My name equals Greg, year equals 2015, and so on. Or another place we store these attributes is in that ID tag. So if I go back, we're almost done here. I store the attribute for the variable representing the object checkbox in this name checks to. So that's where the variable names apply to what we talked about this evening. And that is the end of the lecture. If there's no other questions, we will